G'day folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back for another F1 fantasy video. In today's video, we're going through my team selection for the Spanish Grand Prix. So if you're new around here, you know what to do. Drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. We're going to jump straight into how my team did in Monaco. Lots to unpack and a very exciting weekend for those who use the Limitless chip. I had 333 points all out, and if you dropped into my deadline stream on the Saturday, it was by far and away the best deadline stream of the season. Incredible viewership throughout the 2 hours. I was deliberating whether or not the Limitless chip was right for me. I was toing and froing and after free practice, and it was largely because of the fact that Ferrari did look so good, but Monaco can be a very risky track. But the F1 Fantasy Tools Sims pushed me over the edge, and I was very grateful it did, because Ferrari looked good. Mercedes were falling out of favor in the template, and I wanted to go for a weekend that it would be optimal for the delta between limitless and non-limitless teams, and there were differential assets where I could triple up on two teams and bring in Max Verstappen. And I'm very glad that Ferrari were confident and capable and looked the part in free practice. So I went all in on Ferrari, tried to optimize and maximize the upside with the team there, and it proved to be very fruitful indeed. Went for Charles on the 2X as well after what we saw from him in free practice. Was very confident he could get pole position, and unfortunately he missed out with Lando Norris setting a lap record in Q3 to obviously take P1 and convert that into a win on Sunday. So a great result for Lando. Obviously very unfortunate for Charles, but still very happy with how everything came together. It was, from limitless experiences in the past, a weekend I was heading into with a bit of trepidation, but it just all came together. It was truly a great outcome for anyone that used Limitless. And if you use Limitless, let me know down in the comments below. Also aided by the fact that Mercedes, after a disappointing Imola, backed that up with an absolutely diabolical qualifying session on Saturday. They were nowhere, and I think Ferrari really put such a gap between them and any other constructor in the chasing pack. So that delta for my fantasy team was probably upwards of 100 points. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. And I think proved to be one of the most, let's say, rewarding weekends, not just from a fantasy perspective, but after we saw a lot of people use the chip in Saudi Arabia, Japan, even Miami, in a weekend that I thought was maybe not the best time with the weather and such, and waiting for a weekend where there was a clearly defined two teams and Max Verstappen to choose from. It reaped the reward, and I think patience finally held out after obviously not really deciding whether or not in the lead up to this weekend, particularly in Imola as well, another low overtake track, if that was the right weekend for me. But I'm glad I held firm, targeted Monaco. It paid off. 333 points, as I said, springboarded me from the 60,000s into the top 10K. And we're just going to keep carrying that momentum forward into future weeks. So very happy, as I said, with how the weekend came together. If you use Limitless, let me know down how your team performed this weekend or weekend just passed. In terms of key takeaways from the weekend in Monaco, as I said, Limitless users came out on top. The delta between them, or Limitless teams and non-Limitless teams, was upwards of 100 points in most situations. Obviously, if you went Lando Norris, you had a few extra points in the kitty. I was always going to go for Charles and play that upside for that differential driver of the day, which he obviously got. But Lando obviously winning the race was enough to obviously take away a couple of extra points that Charles could have gone. But notwithstanding that, Monaco had, in my opinion, one of the best deltas of the season. And how I can calculate that is actually through a new tool on F1 Fantasy Tools. If you have access to their premium features, you can use the hindsight tool on their website, which I will bring up here. It's in beta form at the moment. If you're a patron subscribed member, you have access to all of these premium features. If you're not and you'd like to, you can get 50% off your first month of F1 Fantasy Tools using the code HUB50. Details of that and the link to their Patreon to obviously access the tools and such is in the description below. $5 a month, $250 for your first month. It's a pretty good deal if you ask me. So this hindsight tool will show you the optimal teams for this race weekend. You can obviously filter through each of the race weekends, and that's how I've calculated the delta between the template non-limitless teams and the limitless teams for those weekends. So in Miami, for example, even though Mercedes didn't have actually the highest score as one of the popular constructors, they were for many people, for instance, the most limitless picked constructor behind McLaren, for instance. So that was how the deltas have been calculated. They are general estimates, I will say, so give 10 to 20 points each way. But that's how I've calculated Monaco. Obviously, I can't seem to, unless I'm not able to, I'm not going to try and spend time trying to fix the team and whatnot. But my limitless team was 333 points. So that was with Leclerc as a 2x instead of Norris, right in the spot here with Max over Hadjar. So yeah, this team won. You substitute these two out. That's how I calculate the optimal team. So a really useful tool for me to gauge the deltas between each of the weekends. And I think it's pretty telling now that although sprint weekends still have merit in using the limitless chip, it's proven so far this season that the most successful limitless weekends are the non-sprint weekends. Monaco around 110 over the non-limitless teams. Saudi and Japan about 90 to 100 each. So I do think there is certainly a groundswell of people slowly migrating towards these non-limitless weekends, these low overtaking tracks where midfield and backmarker drivers are just not going to score overtakes and gain those positions that they otherwise would have at higher overtake circuits like Miami and maybe even China, for instance. And I think for that reason, now that we've seen Ferrari really grab the F1 fantasy constructors there's definitely a sentiment that Mercedes are falling out of favor. And I can certainly see that being the case for the next few weeks. They've had a really dismal last couple of race weekends in the F1 fantasy world and just F1 in general after a pretty good start consistency wise to kick the year off. 9 in Monaco, 6 in Imola after 6 consecutive scores of 45 or more points is just downright appalling for an A-tier constructor. 24.7 million Mercedes. If you've got them, they should be a priority of transfer out, and I'll talk about that in just a second for my team selection. But I do think we're really seeing a shift in the template. Ferrari and Red Bull, popular picks, even Williams. Mercedes leaving. Fernando Alonso is a new $4.5 million driver. Liam Lawson now under $5 million. We're probably going to start seeing more teams realign their structures, maybe even see people taking minus 10 hits in Spain. And that technical directive, because of Ferrari's emergence as whether or not they're the real deal, but there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of factors that will definitely inform our team selection decisions. So I think because Mercedes is leaving, Ferrari is re-entering the template. As I said, there's a few other assets to discuss and deliberate over. You throw in the technical directive. It might be a nothing burger. Honestly, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not this will actually affect substantially the performance of cars and teams on the track. Do we see McLaren take half a step back? Do we see Williams leapfrog 2 or 3 steps forward? Does Aston Martin suddenly become a top 5, top 6 team again? There's a lot to obviously consider. We can't really make a judgment call on that until we see at a bare minimum 3 free practice sessions of running in Spain, but it probably won't be at least for another 2 to 3 races that we have an understanding of whether or not this TD is actually having a seismic impact in F1 and F1 fantasy. So lots of factors. I think Ferrari are back on the menu. Does it even make them better than McLaren if McLaren do suffer from the flexi wing adjustments? I just think there's a lot of moving parts, a lot to think about. If you've got your wild card handy, it's definitely going to be on the table for sure if we're seeing a change in the template and our lineups. So yeah, lots to go through, and I definitely think there's an argument for mixing up your teams more so than we have in recent weeks and taking hits if we're seeing changes in the F1 fantasy hierarchy. Now, in terms of transfer targets and thoughts for assets on my radar this weekend, there is 2 Spanish drivers at the Spanish Grand Prix that I am looking at right now. No, we talked about Fernando Alonso as a $4.5 million asset just briefly before. He has bottomed out at that floor after, once again, another DNF. He has had 4 this campaign across 8 race weekends. It's pretty disappointing for him, honestly. That bad luck that ruined him with Alpine in 2022 is now coming back to haunt him at Aston Martin. And it's just been reliability problem or being knocked by a driver on track or whatever it might be that's sidelining him every second or third race weekend. I think because of the fact that Alonso's now at 4.5, there's already Colapinto and Bortoleto there. Liam Lawson will probably join those guys soon. there's optionality at that bottom rung of B tier drivers, but I like Fernando Alonso because of that reliability. I say that in terms of racecraft and experience. The car's obviously a problem within itself, but I think there's maybe an argument if you want to swap out a Bortoleto or a Colapinto. The only thing I think that is maybe a drawback from owning someone like Alonso is that we've seen in the last 2 weeks really good qualifying results. We saw a Q3 appearance in Imola and he backed that up with another one in Monaco. The strategy sidelined him in Imola and then obviously retired at the French Riviera in Monte Carlo. Does this mean he actually isn't that viable if he's qualifying really high and then drops a bunch of positions? It's something I'm definitely toying with. Yes, he can't lose value, but does it make him harder to attain his points thresholds that someone like Colapinto or Bortoleto, who sit at the back and might just get a few positions gained, can otherwise get to? Again, I'm not sure. I think it's nice to have the option at 4.5. I don't think he's an absolute must get, but there are going to be a couple of team combinations we'll look at in just a second as to why Fernando is an option. Carlos Sainz, 8.7 million. Not an incredible weekend by his standards in Monaco, but he has finished in the points every single time he's raced there. His ownership is well down from where it started after 3 DNFs throughout 2025. And I don't think his 1.3 is representative of points per race in terms of what his capabilities are in F1 fantasy. Yes, the DNFs have hurt him this season after retiring in Australia, Bahrain, and most recently in Miami. But at the same time, the Williams is on an upward trajectory. We've seen that from Albon. Sainz had 3 consecutive P6 qualifying performances and then obviously went out in P11 in Monaco. But the car is improving. The car is taking a step forward. James Vowles has definitely shown that they are making moves to compete at the front, or at least compete on a regular basis for points. I think Williams definitely have a shot at a podium this season. And I honestly think Sainz is probably the man to get that. Pair that with a home race at a price where I don't think is going to be much lower for him this season. Those thresholds are going to be probably most attainable in the next coming weeks. So he's on my radar. I don't think Albon is actually the better option at Williams anymore, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But for me, Sainz is a popular asset in my crosshairs at his home Grand Prix. Now, my early team thoughts, as always, drivers I'm holding, drivers I'm thinking about holding but may get rid of, and then drivers that I think most likely will have to make way, whether that's on wildcard or I'm taking hits, we will have to see. Piastri stays for the time being. I think McLaren is still going to be strong, even if there's some kind of impact from the technical directive. Again, we'll have to wait and see what that actually means and whether or not it's substantial enough for me to remove him, but I think value for money wise, he's great. Albon at his price, I said Sainz might actually become more of a relevant fantasy asset. The thing with Albon is that he just has high thresholds every single week, and we'll go back over to F1 Fantasy Tools and look at their budget builder. Alex Albon has to get 15 points for the max price or the minimum price rise in Spain. At his price, the fact it's climbing and climbing and climbing makes me think it's just going to be harder and harder and harder to hit those thresholds every single week. So that's why Sainz feels like a nice stepping off point from Albon. And I think, again, I'd happily be proven wrong, but I think you're getting a little bit more bang for your buck from Carlos Sainz. So yeah, lots to think about for Alex Albon. Mercedes has to go without a doubt. And for that reason, I think let's jump into some team combinations on F1 Fantasy to, deliberate what makes sense and what doesn't. So Mercedes has to go. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind they are gone this week. Ferrari, knee-jerk reaction feels like the most natural fit for me. They've got pit stops as well. If Charles and Lewis are banging out top 5, top 6 results every weekend, then I think they're certainly a force to be reckoned with F1 fantasy-wise. McLaren's still the top dog, but I do think Ferrari have some relevance, or at least I think there's a reason to keep them or consider them at the very least this weekend. A lot of people carrying them off Monaco. That I don't see them as a sell at all right now. So to squeeze them in, I could bring in Carlos Sainz. I think that works perfectly fine, and that would just mean I can play around a bit more with one of these $4.5 million drivers. I have just enough to squeeze to Oliver Behrman, who has his Miami DNF dropping off his average. He didn't have by any means an amazing result in Monaco, but another drive where he started at the back and just managed to gain positions. No overtakes, no nothing like that. Just a sound strategy to move up the field. Has never really been the best qualifier this season, but still seemed to manage to eke out overtakes and positions gained over a race distance. So for me, Behrman feels like a good plug and play there. I'm capped out at 0.0. If I wanted to get a little bit fruity, I could always go for Fernando Alonso over Colapinto. But I think Colapinto right now, his threshold much lower, 7 points, 8 points for a price rise. I just think that's more attainable. Obviously, Alonso has to, I think has to wait a couple of weeks until that DNF drops off his average. But again, if you're patient, you don't want to book a transfer in a couple of weeks, then bring in Alonso now. So I feel like this could work for my team potentially. Now, Red Bull, not really talked about because they've been a bit hit and miss this season. Obviously, Max Verstappen won at Imola. Spain are considered a Red Bull track. Max has got a great history of wins there. You could drop Ferrari out for Red Bull. You're, I think, forsaking A, pit stops, and B, 2 consistent drivers in the top 10. You're losing out on the teamwork points because Yuki Tsunoda can be hit and miss in Q3. I'm probably eating my words a little bit from last week, but you could drop them down. If you want to play around with a bit more money, where else could you go from here? You probably want a 4.5 driver in your team to move around, but Liam Lawson, maybe if you like the RB, they look very good in qualifying in Monaco. Liam Lawson, the absolute shield to give Hadjar a bit of breathing space, so maybe that works. But I think Ferrari, for me, probably the preferred constructor as of right now. Now, I want to look at Williams because there's a couple of reasons they're on my radar. First of all, these guys have had back-to-back $0.6 million price rises this season. Go back over to Fantasy Tools, go the price change, and you can see since Australia, they've gone up 0.6 every single race week. So the threshold for them to succeed is low, even though Sainz himself has had DNFs, and you can see he has plummeted in price every single race. Albon, on the other hand, where's he? He's a bit further up. He's had a few good rises, but Williams are just consistently getting price increases. It'll be very soon that if they keep going at this rate, they'll be up in the A tier at 19 million. So do you want to, I think I have to almost ask myself, do I want to try and take advantage of Williams for 3 or 4 more races while they're at a price that they're still going to get 0.6 rises out of? And then once they get to the A tier, then bin them off? Maybe. So there's a couple of different routes I could go down for Williams. The first of which, probably the more balanced of the two, and that would be Piastri. I'd keep Albon. I say balanced in a sense that it actually involves 3 Williams drivers. A bit spicy, but I do think that could yield some points if Williams look good around Spain. The obvious reservation I have is if Albon or Sainz retires, that's a big fat -40 on your score for 2 DNFs hitting your team. Obviously, one for the driver and one for the constructor. I'm not a huge fan of that for running a midfield team. The other would be probably needing a downgrade to Albon and maybe a downgrade to, let's just throw in Colapinto for argument's sake. I can't get to anyone aside from Antonelli, but this is when you're really entering the 2 B-tier driver lineup with McLaren and Williams. Now, I'm not so keen on the idea of owning Antonelli because he's got he's back down in the B tier. I'm just figuring that out now. I didn't even know he dropped again. So he's down in the B tier, 18.9 million. He's nowhere close to a price rise. So I think then, obviously, you're not going down Antonelli route, but you do probably want to consider a 2 premium driver lineup. This is a bit of a zesty one, going Piastri Leclerc, but it does back you into 2 in my team. You might have enough to get to Colapinto. You get $4.5 million drivers times 3 plus Charles and Oscar. I don't hate it. It just means that if something goes wrong with Charles, or for whatever reason, the Williams constructor kind of has a couple of off weeks, you're really having to make transfers to get out of that lineup. Now, I say that in the sense that you could probably get back to Ferrari or Red Bull in 2 moves. I think you could get Albon in here, right? You get back there in 2 moves, but carrying the 3 lowest priced drivers in the game isn't, for me, the best idea. So I don't know, maybe there's some optionality to pivot elsewhere, but there's hopefully some initial points of view on how you could structure your team for F1 Fantasy. So I'm going to leave that there for now as my early team thoughts for the week, and I will be back with my final thoughts later in the week, but hopefully that's given you some inspiration for F1 Fantasy for the Spanish Grand Prix. As I said at the start of the video, guys, if you're enjoying the content, please drop a like on the video. It helps the channel immensely, but I will leave it there for now. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all very soon.